Our last presenter in this session is Barb Nelson, who is the Executive Director for Troy Architecture Practice, Inc., which is known as TAP. Many of you may know it that way. And I think this is a little bit different. I was not present yesterday, so I don't know if we've had any focus on art, but I think this is a really neat and interesting approach to addressing the issue that we've all been talking about. So I'll let you take it away, Barb.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here. Breathing Lights was a public art project. It was funded by the Bloomberg Philanthropies Initiative. On my screen, I don't see my little notes, so I'm just going to wing it. Bear with me. And I know I've gone over on the slides, so just cut me off. The issue, we all know what the issue is. Everyone is here to affirm that the vacancy is an issue that impacts our cities socially, economically, and physically. The Bloomberg Philanthropies group put out a call for art projects, public art projects, that any city with a population over 30,000, as long as the mayor submitted a proposal to produce and implement a public art project that enhanced the vibrancy of the city and also pointed out an urban challenge. So the Bloomberg Philanthropies had goals to study how public art changes people's impression of their cities, how an art project could change people's opinions of public art. But our deep down goal was to increase awareness and develop actions to address urban blight, and also to mobilize the community. So we had to balance their goals with ours, but it worked out okay. As we said, we all know the issues. You live them every day. Everyone here is steeped in these issues. We have about 2,000 vacant buildings in the three cities. What's unique about this project, and I think is why we were successful in getting the award, there were some 243 cities that applied, and 4 were awarded. But we have a group called the Creative Economy, I can't remember it, doesn't matter. They teamed the 3 mayors together. We're actually a suburb surrounded by 3 cities. It's pretty interesting. So Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. And so we share each other's workforce, we share each other's bad landlords, we share each other's difficult tenants, and we share each other's income populations, diversity. And so the Bloomberg group was very intrigued by this. And I have to, shout out, this is not my project. I'm looking at several of my partners here in the room. None of us could have pulled this off alone. And I think if any single mayor in that group had gotten that call, hey, will you help submit $1 million request to Bloomberg for public art about vacancy? Any one of them would have said, no way. I'm not going to highlight my city's vacancy problem with a big art exhibit. But the 3 of them together, they could lean on each other and say, look, this is a unified issue. So I'll try to trigger lessons learned out of this very strange and it's kind of a fluke of a project. But if you can, again, collaborate and team the organizations or the municipalities that have this problem, you team together, and you're going to be more successful. We saw some amazing things in these buildings, and to be able to put this on exhibit and to really open people's eyes, as we just really wanted to crank up the volume in the discussion of vacancy and blight. So what we did, we took, and what we found, not only was there actual beauty in these very decrepit and deteriorated places, but there was a local drive. There were local artists, local activists, residents who had a lot to say about this, and they had a lot of very deep feelings. And that was really our key, was to give them the voice, to take some of those dollars and engage community members in a way that empowered them to talk about this issue. Fancy graphics. So here, I took these out of other presentations. So we proposed to light 200 out of these 2,000 buildings to install a panel made of LEDs and a very thin wood framework, and to coat it with a small Arduino computer that would allow the light to intensify and darken and intensify and darken. And my lead artist was incredibly dedicated to getting this just right. So it looked like the buildings were actually breathing. And if you sat and watched for quite a while, you would start to breathe with them, and so breathing lights. To do this, we hired local contractors. We bought from local suppliers. The most common question when we first announced this going out was, $1 million, why don't you fix the buildings? And we said, well, we could fix maybe 4 buildings with $1 million, but with our $1 million, we're going to engage an entire community on this issue. So communication was the biggest deal, not relying on social media, but actually paper print, door hangers, really getting to every neighbor across the street and around the corner to let them know what would be happening, and to bring them in, again, give them voice. So I urge you to visit the website. We have a youth media group in each of the cities. They were all empowered to create small documentaries and art videos. We had spoken word, we had rap. If I just spent my 9 minutes playing those for you, that would have been fun. But please go to the website and explore that. We hosted building reclamation clinics. So in each city, we had 3 clinics: how to purchase a vacant building, how to inspect it, what to expect, why not to buy a vacant building. My goal there was to scare half the people in the room so they would not invest their $20,000 of life savings in a building and then have to leave it, because that's just not enough. We engaged the Boys and Girls Clubs and gave money to about 12 different artists. So we had everything from pottery to poetry. It was really just a fabulous experience. I think the key there was actually, engagement is so difficult. You host a meeting and you offer cookies and people come and they talk, but how do you ever really know what they're taking away? But actually empowering them to interpret. We would say, imagine, this house that has been standing for 100 years and it's seen families come and go and grow and live, and then it goes dark. And then for 3 months, we breathe some life into it. We said, what would it say? What is that building saying? What is it singing? What is it praying? What is it telling you? And so all these local artists were able to take that challenge and interpret it. Success, as married by Bloomberg, is very technical. We never, ever promised that these buildings would all get renovated and get purchased. In fact, if I check my tally every 5 months or so, I can see that more and more of them have either been demolished and erased from the landscape, but quite a few have been renovated, have been brought back to life. Oh, right. Good to know. In fact, yes, the one on the left, it was during this beta test that a local landlord said, "What? That's going to be demolished?" And she walked right into David and Steve's offices and said, "Hey, I'm taking this building. You're not gonna take this one down." So just again, cranking up the volume on the problem. The workshops, we reached 150 people or so by training. We were able to count. Oh, so one very key lesson learned. We actually took a small amount of money, maybe $2,000, and we hired 12 neighborhood ambassadors. So in each city, we had 4 ambassadors, and those people kind of were the go-to in their community. And they did polling, they did surveys, they showed up at every event, they welcomed and greeted people. We took people on tours through these buildings, and we were asked, who's going to come from the suburbs and go on a tour of nasty vacant buildings, And I was amazed. People did it. They're like, oh yeah, put me on the bus. And they're going to neighborhoods that they would never imagine visiting in any other. And when they got there, they were able to go to the Boys and Girls Club or a cultural facility and talk with the ambassadors, see the videos, take a little tour, and see the breathing lights. And it was just, as well as we planned it out, it never ceased to amaze me that it worked. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I think our grandest, and here's one of our participants here, what I think was most successful was our ability to really get people together, lawmakers, people from the state. There's David from the Land Bank. There's Wade, is Wade still here? And pulling mayors and code officers and developing policy briefs. That was really the most poignant. When I sat back and I looked, it's like, wow, all these people are together in a room, and it doesn't happen that often that people give up their time like that. But that was a key evidence of success. I think we could not have been so successful unless we had hired local people. We had 74 contractors, staff and crew. The audience, because now, so here's my recommendation. If you're going to take on an art project, which I thoroughly recommend, just make sure the art is good. Hire a well-known artist. That wasn't me. I was the lead architect. Adam Frelin was a sculptor and a teacher at SUNY, and he had experience. I mean, there's no way Bloomberg would have picked us unless we had the professional experience on our team. So can everybody just go get $1 million from Bloomberg? No. But the lesson here is that it was just a bunch of people, like here in this room, who got together and said, hey, should we try this? Yeah, let's try it. Oh, I've got a grant writer, and I've got this foundation money, and we've got the RPI Lighting Research Center, and we can get the graduate students together to do some beta testing. And when you get this momentum going, it gets recognized. So whether you're getting recognized at the state level, the federal level, the foundation level, it's just that, that initial idea. It's like, I said to Adam, well, what if we just lit these buildings up? And he says, that's it. I said, well, how are we going to do that? So I must have skipped over a photo of it looked like a bomb, basically, in a trunk with a car battery and wires to all the windows. And there's lots of great good and bad stories on the installations and things we ran into in those buildings. But it pulled together a partnership that, to me, demonstrated that everybody really cared. They really were thinking about this problem, and this was their opportunity. So some of these people gave $1,000, some of these people gave $5 or $10, but it allowed us to leverage that $1 million into $2 million. And there I go, $3.4 million. So the outcomes, these were our ambassadors on our tours. And again, never overlook the potential for one person, no matter how young, how old, to be a spokesperson for their community. They might just be looking for the opportunity. And I urge you to check the website and see all the really good stuff there. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, and I'll just point out that you did an excellent job without notes, so thank you for sticking with it. I want to open it up to questions for them. We've asked you to hold them throughout. What are your questions for this group? You can.
I just want to say that it is so worth watching that video. It's pretty long. It was one of the most powerful things I've seen. It's really, really powerful. And you could show it in your own communities or parts of it, but it really tells the whole process and everything that you've gone over, and the need to have it as a grassroots project as well. But the end effect on so many levels is so powerful.
Don't be shy. There was a lot here that we squeezed into a short period of time.
So folks are looking for other success stories. At our conference website, we've archived all the presentations. So from equitable code enforcement to land banking strategies, anchor institution partnerships, it's a great resource for folks. So question, Barbara. We did this to raise attention, or you all did this to raise attention to the issue. Can you state that unequivocally that it drove additional investments or policy change to these places of distress and disinvestment?
Mayor Kathy Sheehan in Albany will tell you that yes, it did. She has seen funding and programs come her way, and there she is, right in the middle of the state capitol. And she was one of the most interesting advocates to hear these mayors who, and she would say, "I love it. I'm not being asked about fires and shootings. I'm actually get to talk about art." So it gave her it gave them all this sort of neutral, friendly platform. But yes, she will tell you, and I don't have all the numbers, but she has seen a number of funding come through. Maybe our other land bank partners, Adam's left, but maybe David could speak to that.
So a lot of the pictures were from our Eastern Avenue focus area, and we very much highlighted, and our idea was to remove or rehab as much of the blight in that area as possible within kind of an anchor-centered project for affordable housing, historic preservation of Old Church School. Breathing Lights was written all over our application about how that was a big part of our push. Long-term policy changes, I have partners here from the city of Schenectady. It's difficult. I mean, it's all the energy was there, and then there's always something else, right? But I think just looking at this picture to me is very powerful too, because those kids, this is their home. This is what they knew, and they were engaged in this process, and seeing them understand a little bit more now about what's going on and these ideas. They'll remember this house breathing for the rest of their lives, and that will be something that will hopefully, as they go and do good things, they'll have like a sense of place and a sense of home that has something to do with that. And so I think there's obviously the dollar investment, but it's the sense of community that's been created in some of these areas has been real powerful.
Just to piggyback off that, Avi from the city of Schenectady, I don't know if there's necessarily been one single policy that derived from that, but I came on for Department of Development after this occurred, and we still have people talking about it. We still have local people who are empowered, who feel that they can now step up to represent their communities. And it's just caused more dialogue within the city. I think the leaders also aren't as afraid to discuss the issues revolving around vacant and zombie properties, because everyone's on the same page with it. And then just more generally, I think it speaks to the power of story. I think we've heard so much in the last day and a half from academics to some, funding, just kind of all over the place, but bringing it together and providing a story with it is just so powerful, and it gets people on board in a way that I wouldn't have normally assumed.
Yeah, and just to add on that one more time, I know in Albany, not only was I hired as part of that process that this sort of helped begin in many ways, but we've revisited our vacant property registration legislation twice now in the past 2 years and revised it twice to make it better. We did a whole inventory of all the vacant structures, which the last one hadn't been was completed in 2008, I think, right? We went a whole 10 years as a city without having a full grasp of what exactly was out there and what was vacant and what wasn't. So there's definitely a lot of energy that followed it, and we're still applying for more. There's plenty of other funding sources out there. Looking directly at Carrie, because through Cities Rise and LISC and all these other funding sources, there's a lot more out there, and we're still pursuing all of that. But that's always the question with art, right? Like, all right, you sent the message. What's the result of that? So that's always the struggle, I feel like, with art and artists, who take on a cause. And Barb, I think you guys, you all took on quite the cause and have had a pretty big effect, I think. Though it may not be as direct as some people ask about.
Yeah, no, Breathing Lights can't take credit for all these actions, but I think we were in the right place at the right time, and that's why the project was so well supported. But I can tell you that now when you walk in with a public art placemaking project, like the Resta Green work that you do, the city officials and whatnot, they're much more likely, at least in our area, to say, "Oh, you want to do some art? Oh, okay." it's just, it's benign. They're not afraid of it anymore. So I've noticed that.
So a lot of what I just heard in that conversation was about local empowerment, and I kind of want to target a question to Christine based on that. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit of a rebel in me, but when I learned a little bit more about your project, I was really intrigued because I think sometimes communities feel very overwhelmed and unempowered when going up against corporate interests. So as you're talking about tackling the banks, and I'm curious what you would say to the audience about, making the decision to go after a bank, not just on a single property, but throwing it all in there and saying, no, let's have this conversation. So was it intimidating initially, or what would you say to others in thinking about going after them, but also creating the partnerships that you were talking about?
So was I intimidated? No, actually. And I think because we had this nice cushion of LISC funding that could help us take on, because really when you think about it, banks have so much, they have resources. They could own Niagara Falls in 7 seconds if they wanted to, right? So I guess I was like, well, okay, we had like a nice funding stream, and the point of the grant is to see, does this law have teeth? Because no one really knew that back in 2017. We know now that it does because of, municipalities that are litigating, right? Or have litigated, it's continuing. So I wasn't really intimidated, but at a certain point, it's like someone has to do something, right? And I was basically hired, just how Sam was, to do something. So that was kind of like a box I checked. I'm like, okay, cool, like State Supreme Court, got it. And we committed to that on behalf of the community, because Niagara Falls is pretty depressed. And the community is a little bit jaded because the general consensus is nobody cares. This place doesn't matter. So my message was this place does matter, and it matters for many reasons. So I'm happy to take on corporate America. And when I say me, I mean my legal team. I did not go to court, so I didn't write any of the papers, but I was like, yeah, guys, do it. And they did it very successfully. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You also did, I think, a lot of public advocacy around it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the awareness and advocacy work? There were big signs and zombie walks and things like that, right? Yeah, I know. But I think it mattered because it engaged your community. You were fighting on behalf of neighbors.
Right. I have mixed feelings about the bank shaming with the signs. They were cute signs. They were like, I forget what they say. It was so long ago, but it was just like, how did the zombie get here? We're looking at you, Citizens Bank. So it was like a little bit tongue in cheek, and it was like a little bit funny. But we did get a big community response, and I would have thought, if you had asked me then, I would have thought it would have been a negative response. Because things around the internet, and people are just negative, and they're commenting, and you're like, oh, we just painted the city gold, and you hate it? Like, what? So I had imagined a much more negative approach, but people were like, oh my God, someone cares. And we can see these visible improvements. So we bank shamed, we bank shamed, there was no response. We took it to state Supreme Court, and the community was very, I got so many calls and so many emails about that. People were like, oh my God, someone at City Hall is doing something. And I was like, well, we're all doing something, but this is just really visible. And it made new, it was in the headlines, it was a whole thing. So the bank, mixed feelings about the bank shaming. It was effective. You didn't hear it from me.
Thanks. Nate Garland, City of Auburn. I have to say to everybody in this room, it's been a true inspiration, and I've been enlightened just to be in the same room with problem solvers and thinkers. So thanks for having a cynical a-hole attorney like me at your conference. I don't know Christine, but I'm guessing that she would say, if I could do this, then anyone can do this. You seem like you're that sort of person. I can tell you the numbers do not bear that out. That there are, what she's done in Niagara Falls has just been tremendous. I want to follow up on some questions that David asked of Christine regarding cause of action relative to the zombie property laws specifically. Is there a cause of action for when your codes guys find a house that they know to be vacant and abandoned, and that a mortgage servicer or lender has posted up with the requisite paperwork that they have to post? Can you sue on that basis alone? And I believe that you can. As you said, Christine, you just got to go out and do something, right? The law is brand new, basically. There's zero case law that's been developed on this, And by my reading of the law and the regs, yes, you can sue on that, and we in fact have sued on that and successfully had properties added to the DFS list in our city. The other thing is, you also mentioned this, Christine, what can everyone in this room do to make their legal team happy? It didn't get out of committee in the Senate this year, but there was an amendment proposed to Real Property Actions and Proceedings Law 1309, which is the expedited foreclosure process, which is currently, as Christine said, on the voluntary basis. You can push your elected representatives to talk to their state level people. The bill would have allowed municipalities to require, to be able to sue on that basis and get properties to go into this expedited foreclosure process. And that, I mean, then we'd all have Niagara Falls numbers, right? So that's something that everyone can kind of take back and talk to their political people about.
That would be amazing. Oh my gosh. That's like, from my perspective, that's like the flaw of the law. It's like, well, if you want to expedite it, so that's the ticket. All right, let's get that through.
Hi. I know there's land trust being used in a couple areas across upstate New York, specifically around Chautauqua and Utica. And I was wondering what your experience has been, if it's extensive, with an effect on the affordability of housing, and what supports need to be provided to increase this affordability.
Actually, I'm not familiar with the land trust side of it.
Can you use the microphone, please?
No, a little bit. I know very little bit about land trusts, only because I worked, one of our clients is a land trust in Albany. I think, and Troy is starting to explore developing a land trust, I think it's one of the most sure ways to establish affordable housing and keep it affordable, because as you purchase that house, you are bound, to sell it when you sell it to another qualifying, family. So I don't think it's easy to put together, but I think it's definitely one of the best tools for affordable housing, sustained affordable housing.
Can we turn that back to the audience? Is there anybody with a land trust that would like to address that?
So while I recognize the strength of land trusts, I'd also say that habitat is another way to ensure permanent affordability. So we're working with our community land trust in a pilot program, and quite frankly, it's hard for me to sell it to our homeowners, because when you're in a habitat home, there's a shared equity clause so that they get to take their half their equity with them, but then habitat takes half of it back so that we can put it back into building homes. In the land trust model, they're earning very little equity in their home, at least in our land trust model. There may be others, I don't know. So how do I sell it to a family that now has to pay a land lease to a different group plus their mortgage to us? There's restrictions because the land trust has certain things that they want to make sure the house and the homeowner does in that community. And when they go to sell it, they're not building the equity that they would if they were with Habitat. So if you don't have a Habitat in your community, then certainly a land trust is an option.
I would just highlight the extent to which that can be an issue. And another one, another flip side in a way of what you're talking about, as I'm familiar with, locally the problem was there was a certain amount of money that the land trust had to work with initially, essentially an endowment to start working financially. All of the equity in the property went to the homeowners initially, but over time, this is in our area, over time as land values were going up and up, the land trust actually had lower and lower capitalization to work with. So they actually had to shift their model to a shared model so that they would be able, in a very rapidly rising market, be able to actually work with some homeowners. Otherwise, they just had no capital to work with.
Okay, any other questions?
I would say, depending on the goals of the community, I think CLTs can be very effective. There's obviously, there's always going to be challenges. Like there's always challenges with looking at, different opportunities of shared equity. Homeownership has a very specific connotation in this country. And I think when you're exploring different ways of splitting ownership and thinking of long-term restrictions, that's always going to be something that's a challenge for communities to deal with. However, I would say from, we, at the Attorney General's office, we just issued another $9 million for land trusts. I would, probably about half of the land trusts are long-term land trusts, like the Ithaca Land Trust, which has been around for about a decade. But several of the land trusts are new, and I think in some of these newer areas, there's a lot of interest and excitement and new approaches, like as we are dealing with looking at what has happened at housing in this country. I think there's a lot of excitement about people thinking of what does it mean to be an owner, what does it mean to live in a community, and how can you share those benefits. In particular, I know that Rochester, they have a very new land trust, but I met with some of the folks on the land trust board, and new purchasers coming into the community who could afford market rate homes outside of the land trust were interested in participating in the land trust because they wanted to purchase in a way that was not only supporting themselves and their families, but also having a benefit to the community. So I think it's, like anything else, it's a mixed bag. There's always going to be challenges, but I think for communities who are looking at stable long-term ownership, I think land trusts present a very interesting model of doing that. I think also coming from New York City and seeing what's happened to a lot of the affordable housing programs that existed for 40 years and seeing communities that had strong affordable housing initiatives lose those as the market changed, I think that also presents, the opportunities for land trusts and what does it actually mean to preserve affordable housing in perpetuity, and I think the land trust model really opens that option up.
And for those who might want to learn more about it, Grounded Solutions Network kind of serves as the national membership organization for all the CLTs in the country. Great resource. But I do think it's about community control, and it's about permanent affordable housing. I think we have to disconnect the idea that housing is always a vehicle for wealth building. In this case, it's not. And I think we should start challenging that assumption across the board. But more importantly, as more and more cities are losing subsidized apartments, and Grounded Solutions Network will tell you this, to get affordable housing back once the market has shifted costs so much and is so difficult. So bake it in now while you have the chance.
I do want to thank our panelists for sharing.